We are coming back from lunch. Feel free to keep eating, but we're going to our next agenda item, which is Bigelow Canyon Wind Farm. This is an action item. And Sarah Esterson, Senior Policy Advisor, has the floor for the table.
Yes. Thank you, Chair Condon. Good afternoon, members of the council. Next slide, please, Nancy. Okay, so this is an interesting agenda item. It is more in the compliance versus permitting. So I'm going to try to give a little background first. So on March 27th of this year, the council approved a request for Amendment 4 of the Bigelow Canyon Wind Farm site certificate. That authorized the construction and operation of 125 megawatts of solar power generation facility components to occupy up to about 1,900 acres of farmland in Sherman County. Then from March to July of this year, we worked with the certificate holder, Portland General Electric, and their consultants on pre-construction compliance review. And on July 20th, so just 4 days ago, we were notified that they started construction of the solar at the site. But one of the pre-construction requirements that council imposed in the site certificate was related to the exception that was granted to the statewide planning goal 3 as a result of siting the solar on high value farmland. So I just wanted to give a little background, maybe more for the newer council members, but maybe you already know this. So like all solar projects that would need a site certificate from the council, this project required council take an exception. And again, for background, if you don't already know, the goal exception process has kind of 3 primary requirements. One is that council has to find there are reasons that justify taking an exception. Then the council has to find that the certificate holders adequately evaluated the environmental, economic, social, and energy impacts of the project. That's a second prong. And then the third is a finding that the facility would be compatible with adjacent land uses. This particular agenda item is related to one of the reasons of your 3-prong goal exception, the reasons exception. This is related to one of the reasons. So this reason that we're talking about, where that council determined justified the use of the site as an energy facility rather than continuation of use for agriculture, was that the site would result in a local agricultural economic benefit. Okay, so the way that the certificate holder had evaluated and that council approved was they did an economic analysis of the impacts of using this site as an energy facility compared to ongoing ag, and they came up with a $1 per acre amount that was based on long-term impacts of taking this site, and that equated to $1,600 per acre. And they developed this structure where that amount of money, so $1,600 per acre times the acreage to be occupied, which is about $1 million, would be put into a fund that would be administered by the Mid-Columbia Economic Development District under a memorandum of understanding with the certificate holder. And then they would hold that money, they being the Mid-Columbia Economic Development District, and they would draft a request for proposal and issue that. And the proposal would seek projects that would have a benefit to agriculture. And then when those projects are returned in response to the RFP, a selection committee would review those proposals, and they would make recommendations that then the Sherman County Board of Commissioners would review. And if the Board of Commissioners approve a project, then the funds get administered. And then long term, this is how the local economic benefit reason was structured. So part of the selection committee that would review these projects is a non-voting member that's specifically selected by you. So we have done the work of coordinating with Department of Land Conservation and Development and Department of Agriculture, as well as the Oregon Wheat Growers Association, to come up with some individuals that we could bring to you for appointment to be part of this selection committee. Next slide, please, Nancy. And we were given one individual that was recommended by the Oregon Wheat Growers Association. His name is Ernie Moore. He's a fourth generation dryland wheat farmer. He lives in Morrow in Sherman County. And he has is very interested in participating on this selection committee and recognizes it's kind of an interesting position as a non-voting member, but he has expressed interest. He's quite busy and a little difficult to get a hold of, so we have recommended that there be a secondary in the event he's unavailable at any point in time to fulfill the role. The secondary would be Daisy Goebel. She has experience in land use planning and worked for Morrow County as a land use planner for several years, and has worked very heavily in agricultural engagement within communities. So we are recommending as a primary appointment, Ernie Moore, and secondary Daisy Goebel as to be part of the selection committee for this project. And now I turn it over to you for questions, comments, deliberation.
Thank you. Councilor Devlin.
Madam Chair, I have no objection to the parties being appointed. And I do not want to restart this conversation that we had months ago about exclusive farm use and cumulative impacts. But I wonder if we ever go back and look at how these funds are being expended. Compared to some of our projects, this is kind of mid-range or small. It's about 3 square miles. It's about $3 million. If there is an impact on exclusive farm use land, you know, we have a methodology for determining what that impact is, and that impact is over a fairly long period of time. I wonder how sometimes these funds are being used, because if they're used in a 2 or 3 year period, I wonder if anybody remembers 10 years from now what funds were made available and how they were used. $3 million moderately invested could probably generate 180,000, 200,000 a year, which wouldn't be a bad return. Probably most farmers would be pretty happy with that amount of net return. I'm just wondering if we ever go back and look at how these funds are being expended. A great deal of confidence in the organization. I mean, it's existed for over 50 years. It has a very good reputation. But I'm just wondering if we're kind of kidding ourselves if this actually has a long-term impact on agriculture in the area.
Mm-hmm. So this approach to kind of using mitigation funds to mitigate under the goal exception is relatively new. We've seen it on a couple of projects, but this is only the second project where it was in this like exact model. And this is the first project that's actually moving forward. So this is the first one. And we are trying to pay close attention because of those exact questions. There is a reporting obligation by MCED back to us, as well as the certificate holder on progress, on like, you know, because they have to first come up with the 9-member selection committee. We have this little piece of having one non-voting member. So they have to do that. They have to develop an RFP, issue it. They have all these administrative steps first before the money can even get distributed. But then they have a reporting obligation. And so we're going to keep track, but we don't have answers to that question today based on any experience. And, but are certainly looking closely at the mechanics of this whole thing, and whether and how it can be repeated and whether and where it can't be repeated, and the pitfalls of how will we know how beneficial it will be? When does the project did the funds have to be spent the year in which they're distributed? Or, you know, I don't know right now if there's a reporting obligation by the recipient of the funds. So there's a lot of, and this is like 10 layers away from us because MCED is managing it. They're being paid to manage and implement the whole thing. And we at this point are just a recipient of reporting. So that'll be our avenue to track progress, and we can certainly bring it back for updates because it's an interesting approach. And if it doesn't work the way intended, we don't want to repeat it.
Thank you, Councillor Devlin, and I agree. I think it's um, I think we need to watch it closely, very closely. So, Councillor Byer.
Just a quick question. On this one, and I think on the other ones we've done, the local government has approved this agreement. The Board of Commissioners has been maybe not a signatory, but has agreed to this mitigation fund as part of meeting the Goal 3 exception.
The Sherman County is a signatory to the Memorandum of Understanding.
Okay.
So it's certificate holder, Sherman County and MCED have all agreed to implement
Okay,
the plan as laid out in the community investment plan.
right. But I agree with the other comments that
Yeah.
this will be interesting to see how it unfolds.
Any further questions? Thank you for the two candidates. I think it's good to have an alternative. I am, and I know we already decided it, but I am interested in the non-voting status of these two members, and maybe that's something to look at in the future. So, Councillor Calderon.
Thank you. Yes, Sarah, has this been done before by the council ever? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a relatively new approach, but it was refined in the way they're doing here one other time in the Sunstone project. And I think we did that hearing that one just got transferred to Amazon. And so they're not as far along as this one is, but basically we have two projects that followed this model. Now all future solar are trying to follow this model, and it's already not landing well with different counties. So we're really kind of questioning like what is going on here. Not every approach works for every project, but anyway, so this is the first one out the gate that's this far along.
Yeah, thank you for your response. Yeah, I was curious what the public's view of this was. So we don't want them to view it as an easy patch or like, oh, you're just giving us funds for something you're promising. So I just want to make sure that it's going to be handled correctly. And if we've
Right.
done it in the past, what's our track record? But we're all still kind of new at this time. So I really hope it benefits the people it says it's going to benefit in the fields
Right.
and the state.
Exactly.
So with that, if there's no more discussion, is anybody ready to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. This is Kent. And so Chair Condon, I move that the council appoint Ernie Moore as the non-voting member to the Bigelow Canyon Wind Farm Agricultural Mitigation Fund Advisory Committee and Daisy Goebel as Mr. Moore's alternative as presented and recommended by staff.
We have a second. Thank you very much, Councillor Walton. Any further discussion, Mr. Secretary?
Richard Devlin,
Aye.
Denise Calderon,
Yes.
Kent Howe,
Yeah.
Ann Byer,
Yes,
Les Walton,
Yes.
Cindy Condon.
Yes.
Motion carries. Chair Condon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now we are moving on to the Oregon Trail Solar Amendment 2. It's a request to waive in-vicinity public hearing. This is an action item. Secretary Cornett, Assistant Director for Siting and Council Secretary, will present.
Thank you, Chair Condon, members of the council. For the record, Todd Cornett. As indicated, this is a request to waive the in-vicinity public hearing associated with an amendment And just to be clear, this is the department's request. The certificate holder has not made this request. Only the department is making this request. So just to start, with a little bit of an overview of the project, as you can see on the screen, it's currently under construction. It's 40 megawatts. This is one of the splits projects. So this wasn't approved as such. It was split off. But it's under construction, 41 megawatts, 100 megawatts of battery storage, located in Gillum County. The parent company is Avangrid. And next slide, please. So the proposed amendment itself is to take the Oregon Trail Solar Project portion that's under construction, which is right now just the 41 megawatts of solar. It actually had the ability to do solar and wind, but they're only doing solar and not the wind. So they want to split that off of the battery storage, that 100 megawatts of battery storage, which has not started, or no, sorry, that's under construction as well. So split those off into two certificate holders. And again, it's still going to be the same parent company, Avangrid, as we're seeing with some of the NextEra projects, particularly with the Wheat Ridges. This is largely about, the ability to, market or construct projects, having a power purchase agreement. So there's a lot of, what's going on in the market right now. What are they able to sell? What are they able to build? So that's the proposal, is to divide this project once again, kind of based on some of those sub elements. But both of them would still be council jurisdictional because they were originally approved by council and they're still council jurisdictional. So even though if these were like brand new facilities being proposed, they wouldn't be, or at least they would have to opt into FSEC. Next slide, please. So the amendment rules that exist as of today, kind of going back, the council changed the amendment rules not too long ago. One of the things that council did was to eliminate the type A and type B reviews. There is no type A, there is no type B. There is one type of review, and that's the default type. And that requires an in-vicinity public hearing in front of council. That's the mandate, that's the standard that's set. And, but the council did create the opportunity that, recognizing that previously under the type B rule procedural requirements, those didn't even require a public hearing. They required public notice, written comment period, but there was no public hearing at all. So the idea here is making it a little bit cleaner and easier. We spent a lot of time doing those reviews of type B requests, and, did that have the value that we thought it was going to? No. And so that's why we adjusted and went back to like a singular type of process. But I think it is important to recognize that, some of these amendments are pretty minor in nature, or at least, from the public's perspective, there may not be a lot of interest and participation. And so is the effort to go out and be in the vicinity, of the project worth it or not? And it is somewhat speculative, agreed, that we won't know that, and we couldn't know that until we actually held it and determined that there wasn't interest. So it's basically looking at the data and the information that we have at hand, making a reasonable forecast that there, isn't going to be much public interest in order to help justify that. So the three aspects here are, how can the council determine that a in vicinity public hearing isn't necessary? And just to be clear, it's in vicinity. It's not in person. It still is going to be an in-person public hearing in front of council. That's going to occur at a council meeting. So that doesn't change. It's just the in vicinity requirement. And if it is in vicinity, more likely than not, we're going to do it on Thursday evening rather than on a regular Friday. Because again, the idea being, we want to make sure that people have the opportunity to participate. Most people, still work who might be interested in these projects, and holding it during the day on a Friday may either mean that people aren't available or they have to take time off work. So if we are going to have an in vicinity, again, not a legal requirement, but more likely than not, we're going to have it on the Thursday evening so that people have time to conclude their workday and still make it to a council meeting, and be able to participate. So that's the idea of kind of those in vicinity, in-person public hearings. So how you can determine, that you do not believe that it is required is the amendment limited in scope? And is there a forecasted lack of interest in the amendment? Those are the two things that we're looking at today. And we also built in that idea of what if there's a global pandemic, or what if there is a fire that makes it impossible to travel, or, road conditions in the wintertime. We want to build that opportunity as well to make still sure we can hold the public hearing, people can participate remotely, but sometimes traveling can be dangerous for varying reasons. And we wanted to kind of create that opportunity as an out and not have to simply push that public hearing to another month later on. So next slide, please. So our analysis, kind of like the one we just had a public hearing on the split. We did get some public comments. So, but we just had an amendment on a similar type of split, and that's what this one is. So, the proposal is just to split it and not make any substantive changes to the subsequent projects. There is always some administrative complexity. Some of the conditions will geographically apply to one area versus the other. Some of them will, apply to battery storage versus the solar. So we'll have to kind of work through that and split those things up to make sure that that's, clear, but it's more administrative than substantive. So, there are no construction or operational design changes. There are no changes to, really substantive conditions that we're anticipating. And therefore, we're not forecasting much, if any, interest by the public. Now, again, this is staff's analysis, not the certificate holders not making this argument. We are making this effort. And therefore, that is our recommendation that, based on that information, next slide, please, Nancy. Yeah, is that, that justifies not requiring an in vicinity public hearing. So that's where staff's at, and I'm going to turn it over. Actually, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, these got reversed. So council options, you either can agree with staff and waive it's in vicinity, not in person. That's incorrect. My apologies for that. That's an incorrect statement on the slide. So waive the in vicinity hearing. The option 2 is that you don't agree with staff's recommendation and you want to retain the default in vicinity public hearing. And now go back, sorry. I'll turn it over to council for your conversation, discussion.
Thank you, Secretary Cornett. Councilor Haas motioned. Lickety split. We'll have time for discussion after the second.
Pursuant to OAR 345-027-0367, I move that the council waive the in vicinity public hearing for the Oregon Trail Solar Amendment 2 for the reasons presented and recommended by staff.
Second, Madam Chair.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? I have a Councilor Beyer.
So I'm kind of torn on this one. I know the effort it takes to bring everybody out to some of these rural locations. This one may generate a little interest because of the battery storage component. I think people are a little bit concerned about batteries, and that may be due to information as well as misinformation. So I want to just throw that out there. The other bit, and I don't know where in vicinity of this particular project is, I think of Condon and Arlington.
This would likely be Arlington is where we would probably be.
Yeah, and then knowing that we'd have a full council member meeting also in that area may be of some value because there are a lot of projects in various states that are that people still want to discuss or want to know the status of, I always think it's important to go out to where the public has concerns. So I'm torn on this one because I understand how difficult it is to do this, but if we are really interested in getting public input, it's a balance. So anyhow, that's where I am, but I can go either way.
Thank you. And this Chair Condon here. And I am not torn by it. When we made the decision to allow Zoom meetings, not hearings, not in vicinity, it was during COVID. And, that makes perfect sense. But for me, public hearings of any kind, for whatever we have public hearings for, are important in the vicinity. And many of our projects are in Eastern Oregon that when we meet in Salem, we're just there, we're on the west side. And I find the interaction with the public who is interested not only in the issue at hand, the agenda item of the public hearing, but even for the public comment period, during our meetings, when we have a public comment period, and people show up and talk about other projects, I know I have found that really useful, and we spend a lot of time talking about how important the public is in our process, and we believe that. We don't just talk about it. And so I would prefer it to be in vicinity, but recognizing, what it takes to get there. Are there, other things that could mitigate that? We can, the staff is well equipped and very good at online presentations that maybe could be done from Salem. That's somebody else's management responsibility. But I think the in vicinity meetings are really important.
If I may.
And I know you do too, but yes.
And just so you know, like if you're trying to create, say you deny this and you want to retain it, there are also opportunities when we go out there that there can be site visits. So we can try to create some additional value. I mean, it does take, I recognize the travel of many council members, who travel very far, Councilmember Calderon right now, coming from LeGrand is not
I was thinking about you.
insignificant. So I don't want to be saying, oh, it's an imposition on us to travel, because that would be pretty hypocritical. So I recognize, it is important that we travel for all the reasons that you say is valuable to get out there on site. But in addition to that, we can also try to create more value, and not all council members say would have to come out, but to be available. But we could say say if you wanted to retain this, we could then try to create a site visit for Thursday midday, which would give enough time then to still do the public hearing on Thursday night. So there are other values that we can create, and try to maximize the purpose and value of being out there in these locations.
I would strongly support that. Right? The more value we can add to those meetings, the better. And site visits, I know I haven't gone to very many sites and whatnot, and they're always, very, very informative to what it is we're actually allowing to be put on the landscape. So, any further? Councillor Walton.
I was kind of torn about this when I was reading through the agenda, and mainly because bringing in the public and hearing what they have to say and their concerns or their support of it, either way. And it kind of broke it down to what is the intent of having the on-site meeting? Is it to add on to other projects? Is it to do other things? And for me, it was, this is about a project that all we're doing is splitting it. There's no change in the actual scope, and that to bring in other anything could kind of be or to bring in the public for something like that is kind of disingenuous to allude to the fact that they
Yeah, if I may, I mean,
Yeah.
I think kind of, it's kind of going to the scope of the amendment, you know, how significant, you know, is it? And is there a lot of influence that members of the public could have on the review and decision by council? And I think, you know, Councilmember Walton is exactly right. That's also one of the sort of the justifications. I don't want to minimize people's interest. And that's a big, you know, a big thing that if we think people are going to be interested, we should be out there. But is it interest and what's their ability to, you know, affect the final decision if ultimately it is just a split and it's more administrative? I mean, again, I'm not trying to influence the council in terms of what you should do, just trying to add information.
Yeah, and I'm always nervous about forecasted lack of interest, but you know, because that's from our perspective. So appreciate the comment and realize this is a split, and we just did one out of this vicinity. But the one of the reasons that might compel us to do this is fires in the region. I mean, that was something I think we discussed actually when we made the change. So but I'm for an in vicinity, but if there's no more discussion, we have a motion and a second.
So just to be clear, because there was two different motion language, one to approve, one to deny. I mean, I think effectively this vote does either one of those. So, so the motion doesn't have to carry, you know, in order to deny it. So ultimately, if there is, the motion is to allow for the waiver of the in vicinity.
Yes.
And if it's a yes vote, you're waiving that in vicinity requirement. If you vote no on it, you're essentially voting to deny the request to waive the in vicinity and you're retaining the in vicinity. Does that
Yes.
make sense?
Mhm.
Is that
Yeah.
unnecessarily complicated?
No, the motion is to
So
waive.
a yes is to waive, a no is to retain the in vicinity hearing, just to be clear. And we only need one vote on this.
Okay,
Okay. I can go over that again if it's needed. All right.
go ahead.
Sorry.
Mr.
I was
Secretary.
things in my
Yeah.
mind. I'm like, this is super clear. And then it comes out. I'm like, that's not clear at all.
It's clear enough.
Okay. Okay. Les Walton. Cindy Condon.
No.
Kent Howe.
Yes.
Denise Calderon.
Yes.
Ann Byer.
No.
Richard Devlin. Well, if you make, so just to be clear, if you make it a tie, the vote does not carry. Okay. You're a yes. So motion carries. The decision is to waive the in vicinity requirement. Now that that's done, that being said, is one of the other potential agenda items is a notice of intent public information meeting, which could be in that location. So we may end up being there and we may having this public hearing anyway in the vicinity. So it just, we'll see. But that was like at the top of the meeting when I talked about the location of the next council meeting. This was one of the elements that was driving that. And then we also have a notice of intent that, you know, could be submitted today, which then could drive us to have that public information meeting in that same location. So to be determined.
So just a quick comment.
Councilor Byer.
That regardless of the notice of intent or other, that maybe we should plan a meeting somewhere in the gorge, just one, to do a site visit, and second, just to try to engage the public in some of these more general discussions so that maybe a goal of maybe 2 or 3 times a year of being out where the projects are being developed and knowing that project requests will drive our agendas, but that it's not a bad idea to be out there. When it's 100 degrees in the gorge, maybe not, but just, you know, thinking about being present for folks.
And while there are location drivers in, you know, statute and rule about public hearings, the statutes also kind of, it basically encourage the council to hold meetings around the state for those very purposes. So those aren't mandated about when and how, but, the statutes actually encourage council, again, to, with the idea that there is value that people can, be present and have conversations, have actual public comment directly to council in the vicinity of these projects, but also, as you know, sometimes just during breaks and having an opportunity to chat with somebody, that also has value.
Madam Chair?
Councillor Devlin, are you going to change your vote?
No.
No.
Missing put something on the table. If we were going to do one of these, going out to an it would be interesting to have if we're going to go out into an area where projects, be interesting to have a tour, not to put the parties on notice in a sense, but perhaps in one of the project areas where we have had cumulative problems, and have some of the inspection staff with us so we can understand those problems a little bit more. I don't know what a bolt falling from, I've seen some of the bolts putting up the towers and they're large enough to kill a person if they actually fall. I don't know what it does to the to a blade itself if one of the bolts is loose. The blades move relatively slow because it's a very high gear ratio. But it would be interesting to go to one of those sites where we've had like a frequent flyer. It might help some of the inspection staff too.
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up, because it does seem to me that public hearings have to be held in vicinity unless they're waived. But there are other reasons we might just choose to be out. And I think we should think about that with every scheduling of a council meeting. So, yeah. Okay, with that, I think we have our decision and some thoughts moving forward. So, Todd, I think you're still up. Moving on to our next item, which is our final agenda item. We'll be talking about Executive Order 2529, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and advancing Oregon's clean energy future. It's an information item and possible action item. Todd Cornett, Assistant Director for Siting Council Secretary, and Joni Sliger. Sorry, Joni. Senior Clean Electricity Markets are joining us today. And thank you for being here last month and again this month. So you have the floor.
All right. Thank you, council members. For the record, Todd Cornett, Assistant Director for Siting.
And Joni Sliger.
So this will be really just a continuation, really more of a summary of what we did last meeting. So we provided much more detail. We're going to try to just hit the highlights. We recognize, Councilmember Walton is new and, but we're just going to hit some of the highlights. And then the idea was that council wanted us to come back maybe to answer some questions. You may have some thoughts on adjustments to the reports, or if you wanted to add some sort of, statement in either one of the reports, there's an opportunity to do that as well. So, yep. So overview, I'll again talk quickly about the executive order that was sent to you in your materials. Again, it's included in the attachment. It was last month and this month, but didn't want to just rely on the information from last month. The streamlining report related to siting of projects. Joni's report on, reducing barriers, basically when projects get approved, why aren't they moving forward? So ours is sort of during the review phase. Hers is what happens afterward kind of phase. And then again, we'll open that up for any kind of council deliberation and comments. And if you have questions throughout the either of our presentations, please feel free to ask. Next slide, please. Okay, so again, the executive order, not getting into the specific details like I did last time, but generally it is prioritized implementation of the Oregon Energy Strategy Pathways. This was published by the Department of Energy in November of 2025. It creates specific direction to state agencies to develop and implement a coordinated, proactive approach to streamline land use, environmental reviews, siting, permitting, and the interconnection process. So as I indicated, there are these two reports that the Department of Energy is required to create. There's a transmission memo that the Department of Energy is required to produce. The Department of Land Conservation and Development had a report that they were required to issue, which they did, and it's on their website now. And the Public Utility Commission also had some kind of roles in this as well. So next slide, please. Okay, getting into the siting report, specifically, the high level kind of direction is evaluate existing authorities, rules, practices to identify opportunities to streamline or increase the efficiency of siting and permitting processes, and where opportunities are found to exist, recommend actions. So the report's pretty long. It's like 90 pages, but it's, you know, the idea behind that, next slide, please. Okay, have more details. Yeah, well, the overview, you know, was not just focusing on where can we change things, you know, although that's obviously the direction of the executive order report, you know, that's sort of lacking context, you know, because we hear that all the time. Make it faster, make it faster, make it faster. Well, why does it work the way it does? Are there opportunities to be more efficient and streamlined? Absolutely, there are. You heard Phoebe's presentation was all about that. You heard Tom's presentations on rulemaking, which fundamentally is all about that as well. We have two very significant elements of our program that are designed to do this every single year throughout the year to make the process work better. We're already doing that. So what I wanted to do in the report was to give a little better context of who we are. Why are we here? What are we doing? How does our process work? Who is involved in our process? In order to at least establish why it takes sometimes the time that it takes to get through the process. You know, it's not short, we recognize that, but it is very thorough, very transparent, very inclusive, very data-driven, you know, and that takes time. That takes time to get through that. And so we hear from people all the time, make it faster, make it faster. Well, part of that is to what end, which is kind of Joni's part. It's like we can be more efficient, we can be better, and we should. But we also shouldn't eliminate the protection of resources or eliminate public participation in order to get these things expedited when they're not actually going into construction for years or ever anyway. So there is different elements. So, you know, the report provides kind of an overview, a history, all of the steps in our process. Who has responsibility? We absolutely have responsibility on some of those steps. The developers have responsibility on many of those steps as well. It's their responsibility to turn things around, to submit applications, to provide good information that we can review. So there's a lot of sort of reliance on them to do well, as, you know, to make sure that the process goes as smoothly as possible. So, you know, that history, the overview of what we do, the things that we've already been doing, process improvement, rulemaking, you know, to say what are the things that we've been doing for a long time? What are the things that the legislature has been doing for a long time? What are some of the other big ticket evaluations that have occurred? And there's been a lot. You know, we have been a pretty scrutinized process and program since its inception in the current sort of, you know, situation since the 1975. So with all of that, what are some of the takeaways? And that's what I wanted to leave you with before you get into any kind of deliberation. So, oh, sorry. Yeah, go back. I didn't get that yet. So what are some of the notable numbers, you know, and these are, again, just renewable energy. This isn't the history of EFSEC with, you know, other types of projects, just renewable energy projects. Well, 13 gigawatts of active projects. That's wind and solar. Many of these include battery. That 13 gigawatts of generation, and that is anything that's under review, that has been approved, that hasn't gone into construction, in construction, or in operation. So 13 gigawatts of renewable energy projects. The amount of battery storage, again, council does not have authority over standalone battery storage, but you have more experience than anybody in the state of Oregon in reviewing battery energy storage projects. It's not even close. Almost 8 gigawatts of battery energy storage also that's active, through that, application through operational phase. 9.3 gigawatts of projects that either went through the entire process and were approved, but didn't construct and terminated, or they only constructed a portion of the projects, or they withdrew prior to a final decision. So, almost 10 gigawatts or above 9 gigawatts of renewable energy that started, that's, ended for some reason. And then 3.29 gigawatts of active, or these are approved projects that could theoretically go into construction at any point in time. Some of these have been sitting there for 4 or 5 years. So again, this really is what relates to Joni's sort of analysis of why are these projects getting approved, why are not going into construction within a short period of time after they're getting approved. And we're seeing some of these time extensions. There's many reasons for that, and I won't jump her report. She can kind of talk about those as well.
Can we do questions while you're?
Yeah, feel free.
Councilor Byer.
Quick question on the 9.3 gigawatts. Do we have any idea why these have been terminated? Do we have any sense of why somebody went through the process or withdrew?
I think it varies. I mean, you saw the West End Solar. They didn't begin construction. They, basically it timed out and they couldn't begin. So why? I mean, you'd really have to go ask them. Is there lack of power purchase agreement, lack of interconnection, nobody willing to buy the, that maybe it was a corporate decision. I don't know. Some of these, we really don't have any, they don't have to provide that data to us, and they don't. It's a big number. I mean, when we talk about like all the needs for, renewable energy, and it's, in terms of meeting the kind of the goals of the state, I think these are important to look at. Why didn't these move forward? Some of them, I mean, when I first came to the agency, we were just sort of at the kind of just past the apex of the wind boom. And a lot of those projects originally were approved and almost immediately went into construction. Then we hit a phase where, based on, I think, a combination of things, the production tax credits went away. So a lot of those projects went on hold. Some of them died. Some of them ultimately did get constructed years later. And we also had, like, after those initial, I think, sort of good projects and good locations, we ended up having some more marginal projects and maybe marginal developers, more speculative. And those are a lot of the ones that didn't make it through and withdrew prior, either didn't submit an application after they started the notice of intent process, or even got into the application and then just never went forward with it. So, yep. Yeah. So, again, there's a lot of probably potential information and data, behind this, but it is, I think, helpful to have some of these big ticket takeaways.
Yeah, and I think we talked a little bit about that last month. And one of the things I was wondering is if, as we look at our rules and whatnot, could we ask that question when a project is pulled? And it's informative, actually, in reviewing the document again, the draft report again, what we're relying on, you present it and say, we've got this many projects out there, but they may not be built, we might learn something from the projects are being pulled for whatever reason. So if there's in our process of review of rulemaking or whatever, I would love to look at that.
So
I'm not,
Can
oh,
I,
go ahead.
can I
Yeah.
quickly respond? And I think, I think that's where we have to look. I mean, certainly through rulemaking, what can we get? Do we have a reason for getting it? And not to push back too much on that, but, in the 90s, when the need standard went away for generation facilities, that's what's kind of driving a lot of this information, which the developers are not required to give us because it's market driven for energy generation projects. The legislature determined it's a market sort of mechanism. There's no need to justify for the project. So they're not required to give us this information, and they typically don't because they're not required to.
And I understand that. You've explained that to me a number of times, but what is interesting to me about this draft report and other things we hear from the state, the Department of Energy, is about, we don't have enough energy production, and how are we going to fill the demand? And that is that's a hidden area. It just surprises me we don't have a need standard, but I know we don't. And so it might not have been thought important at the time, but we are entering a different time. So I think it'd be interesting to look at. And on that same note, the numbers here, are they like the capacity of the project itself, or is it based on what is actually produced from a project?
It's based on nameplate
Nameplate
capacity.
capacity,
So, and that's a good question because there's a sort of mixing and matching, part of that's by rule and statute. Sort of what's the maximum, capacity of a facility, of a turbine, of the combined turbines on a facility. That's not what it's going to produce.
Right.
Because wind and solar, theoretically produce about a third of the time. So these numbers are not, like a baseload gas plant, 24/7, 365. It's based upon if it was producing power at 100% capacity, that's what it would produce. But we know, and so those are legitimate numbers, but it's not like they would be producing that power all the time. It's about, they would be producing that power about a third of the time, which is again, why we're seeing a more increase in the combination of wind and solar and battery storage, so that you can not get a firm generation, facility, but more firm than if it was just solar or just wind. So you add both of those or, those with battery makes it a better, more consistent generation facility. So that's what we don't have many of the battery storage components constructed because I think that's really just still, I think that the market and industry is figuring out where they want to go with that. I think at some point we'll probably see a big boom in battery storage construction, but we just haven't seen it yet, in spite of the fact that, almost 8 gigawatts of battery storage that's active, associated with FSEC projects.
Yeah, I just think for me, I use these numbers a lot, and it's a bit of a false narrative that, when you talk to people and say there's this much out there, well, kind of.
Yeah.
It's out there. So
Yeah, there is like everything, all the stuff, it's a part of the story.
Right.
But to understand the story is pretty complicated and nuanced.
Exactly. Councillor Howe.
It's pretty amazing to me, the take two withdrawn, terminated, and approved but not built yet. That adds up to the amount of active electrical production that FSEC.
Yeah, yeah, it's a lot.
Thank you. So continue.
Next slide, please. Okay, so, one of the things that also is included in the report is it tried to determine, this is information that we kind of keep track of, and so it's pulled out of all these renewable energy projects. So what are the timelines? And this is what people are very interested in, and understandably so, and it's legitimate. So what's the average time to submit a preliminary application after submitting a notice of intent? 375 days, so just over a year. but that's been increasing. You just saw the request today, to, make that from 2 years to 3 years. So that actually has been increasing. So that's over the history of renewable energy, to FSEC. But that has been increasing. So, from the time that somebody submits a notice of intent, the average has been just over a year. But if we did that within the time frame of the last couple of years, the last 5 years, that would be probably a much longer time frame than that. So part of that is the applicant, the time that it takes for them to put the application together. But part of it is we're seeing, adjusting to BPA and having to do different analysis, or, legitimately, we want people to hear from, us and the public and these reviewing agencies about the notice of intent. And if there are issues, it's an opportunity for them to retool the project and make adjustments. And that can take some time. And that's actually a valuable thing, because we don't want somebody to be like, this is what we put in the notice of intent. And despite all of this sort of feedback and resource issues, we're going to move forward and then have a lot of issues through the review process. Taking a little time to sort of restart, reevaluate, make some adjustments to the project can make it a much better, less impactful project. So that's not a negative thing. There can be a lot of value to that as well. Again, what's the information behind these numbers? There's a lot more to the story. 303 days, average time to determine an application complete. This is a big deal. We've recognized this for a long time. And the whole 3-phase rulemaking is oriented towards this. It is previously, the application requirements and the standards were separated in divisions, and that created problems, because then the work associated with, the application requirements, when we did rulemaking, that was looked at. When we looked at standards, that was looked at. Those were not good one-to-one relationships. So we recognized on our part, that's not a good design. Let's change that design. Let's put the standards and the application requirements to meet the standards together. We've done that. Now it's this phase 3 part. First phase was the procedural and substantive, and splitting those out in a better, rational way. But now we're getting into these phase 3 rulemakings, which is to do exactly that, is to try to better connect the application requirements to the standards, make sure we're asking for what we need. And that should then set the applicants up to do a better job. But at that point, it's still on them. They still have to submit the information. And we frequently will get, information where somebody will submit their application. And it's not just that it was confusing and I didn't understand, but they're like, well, we recognize that we didn't submit the spring surveys because we didn't have time. And it's going to be another 9 months before they can actually submit the spring surveys. And so we know we're going to be stuck in completeness for a long time because of things like that. So at the end of the day, we can do a lot to make this and improve this. And we're trying to do that right now. And you also heard about, from BB, some of the work that we're doing to try to better streamline that request for additional information. So we are working on the areas that are in our control. Ultimately, it's also going to be the responsibility of the developer to do a good job, to shorten that up. And we would like to shorten that up. We don't want to get stuck in incompleteness. We'd like to move forward on that. It takes a lot of time and effort. We would rather do the meaningful and substantive review, of what they submitted and not what is lacking. 427 days, the average time for a contested case step, if there are parties in the contested case. Yeah, there is a recommendation for us to take a look at that. There is importance and value. A contested case is valuable because, the ultimate decision of council is appealable directly to the Supreme Court, and they have 6 months to issue a decision. The only issues that can be raised to the Supreme Court are the issues that are in the contested case. The contested case needs to have that record established. That is important. Boardman Hemingway is a great example. As big and complicated as that project was, there were multiple parties and multiple issues appealed to the Supreme Court. They issued their determination in 4 months, not 6 months, 4 months. That's because of the thoroughness of the record that they had available to them. So everybody loves that sort of part of the process, but there is a lot that goes into that. That being said, is, what I've indicated in the report is typically a contested case is the beginning and end of a review or an analysis on an issue elsewhere. For us, it is one step in the process. So we think there's opportunities to say, you look at it and say, where is there duplication? Where are there things, you know, in timeframes that aren't adding value that could be either eliminated or streamlined and still retain that fundamental value of having a third-party hearing officer review that information in a sufficient way that there is an adequate record to the Supreme Court. That's a long time. 427 days is a long time. We agree with that. So, and that should not be that long. So the average time from a complete application to a final order without a full contested case, 187 days. That's pretty good. I mean, you know, it's not insignificant. I don't mean to say that, but for the big projects that we review, when there are not parties to a contested case, and there usually are not, then, you know, these things turn around actually pretty reasonably, I think. Again, there are always opportunities for us to improve, and we're working on those. You heard that today. But when there's a full contested case, the average time for a complete application to a final order, 795 days. That's a long time. We agree. That's a long time. Too long. And then average time for projects to begin construction after approval, and with the caveat for those that actually begin construction, because some never do. And that's just the beginning. Some of these get phased out, 3.5 years. So that's the average time throughout kind of FSEC, and that's been increasing as well. If we took that slice in the last 5 or 6 years, that would be more than that. So again, you know, council and staff are doing their part. We have improvements to make. We can make improvements, but ultimately a lot of these things just aren't going into construction at all. And if they are, 3.5 years is the average. Next slide, please.
Councillor Walton, I think, had a question or comment.
I had a comment, just kind of add on. One of the things I want to make sure at least I voiced, is that these aren't publicly funded projects that we're working on. These are investments from private entities or corporations, and that if we try to shave this down too much, then we're missing the point of FSEC, which is to ensure that they're keeping Oregon, the Oregon that we love, and that pass on to those that are younger than us, but more nimble than us. But I don't want to I don't want us to lose the focus of what we're doing as Oregonians just for the sake of making it a little bit easier for a corporation, because when these projects go in, they change our landscape. They'll change our landscape for years and years and years.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with that. I think it's important to note that, you know, these are big projects. You know, these are really some of the biggest infrastructure projects in the state of Oregon. So they're not small. And, you know, while they're important and they provide, you know, valuable renewable energy, you know, the goal to meet the goals of the state, that is important. It's valuable. We recognize that. We want to be as efficient as we possibly can. They're also not benign. They're not. They, you know, occupy, like right now, if you combined all of the square miles of solar projects at FSEC, you know, they're active, it's like 115 square miles. It's a lot of acreage, and that's not even including county jurisdictional ones. You know, and wind projects are now taller than the biggest buildings, you know, in the state of Oregon, you know, taller than Multnomah Falls. These are big infrastructure projects that can have a lot of negative impacts on the environment, on the populations that live next to them. So we want to do that thorough analysis to ensure that, you know, either those impacts are avoided, minimized, or mitigated. And that takes time, and that takes evidence. Just a note on transmission lines, you know, we hear, and this is absolutely true. So it's not just, you know, what we're hearing is there is a lack of transmission. Most of the generation is occurring east of the Cascade Mountains. Most of the, demand for energy outside of the data centers, is in the Willamette Valley, and trying to get that, renewable energy from where it's being produced to where it needs to be consumed. There is a lack of transmission. That's fact. But in the history of FSEC, there's been 6 transmission line applications. So not a lot. And 2 of those have been approved. One is Eugene to Medford. That was approved in the 1980s, in the early 1980s. So that one's been around for a long time. Boardman to Hemingway, everybody knows about. That's under construction. Those are like 2 big ones. We've had 2 that were proposed and withdrawn. One was the Portland General Electric's Cascade Crossing project. That one would have gone from Boardman to Salem. So they started about the same time as Boardman to Hemingway. They got through submitting an application and then ultimately withdrew the project. So that one would have actually crossed the Cascade Mountains. Then we had a small one related to, it was almost like an amendment, but it was kind of connected to the Eugene to Medford transmission line outside of Medford. That was a small one that ultimately was withdrawn, and they were able to adjust the project to go to the county level. So those 2 were withdrawn, and then 2 are under review. One is the Umatilla-Morrow County connector line going from Boardman to Hermiston. So not a long project, but it's just kind of above, just a little bit over our jurisdiction. So it's not a significant one in terms of just the distance and the capacity. And then the other big one, which is the Cascade Renewable Transmission Line from the Dalles to Portland, proposed largely in the bed of the Columbia River. So again, in the history of FSEC, actually not a lot of transmission. So with all of this sort of idea of like, we need transmission, we haven't seen many of these projects. We haven't. So, and I know there's a lot kind of planning, and we might see a bunch in the future, but to date, we haven't. Next slide, please. I talked about this a little bit. So what are the past sort of streamlining efforts? Well, the governor, there's been, executive orders. The one we're working on now is not the first one. There have been, mandates for reports. The legislature themselves have made pretty frequent and significant statutory changes to the jurisdiction of FSEC, giving a lot over to the counties with the idea that that would make, things faster and open it up. And, that's actually not what we're seeing, but that is the refrain that every time they make these requests to the legislature or their bills that they talk about. There has also been other reports that have been mandated by the legislature. So any number of those are in the report. And then, numerous working groups and committees, some resulting in legislation, some not. And then again, what do we do? Well, you heard a lot of that today, rulemaking. We've been pretty aggressive, with rulemaking at the council for quite some time. Process improvement, same thing, and we've conducted, 2 program evaluations since I've been here to really, seek some outside evaluation of what do we do, how do we do it, what are the opportunities to improve. So it's not that there aren't a lot of prior things that have been done. There have been a lot of prior and a lot of current things to improve the process. And next slide. And then this is really the takeaways from what are we looking at into the future? What is sort of the newish ideas? Because again, there are always ways that we can improve. I talked about the contested case step. That is worthy of taking a look at to see, can we make changes to that can have some significant impact when there are full contested cases, and there usually are not. But when there are, it's a big deal. The use of artificial intelligence. Tom's been spending a lot of time, doing that, looking at ways to evaluate comments. When we get, a big volume of comments, that's a complicated and time-consuming, just being able to sort those in a way to analyze them. He's working on an AI agent that would do that work and save a significant amount of time. And there are other opportunities for artificial intelligence, but it's never going to be, for us, at least in the near term, the magic button of review this project and tell us that it meets the standards or not. That's not realistic. But there are a lot of ways that we can use it to become more efficient. streamlining information requirements, part of what Tom was talking about in the rulemaking, in terms of these phase 3 rulemaking, what are we asking for? What do we need? That's part of it. Modernization of staff organizational structure. Do we have the staffing that we need, on the reviewing projects, on the compliance? Do we have sort of the management staff? Right now, Sarah, as a senior policy advisor, is the lead worker, but she's not like the manager over that team. That's one of the things that we've discussed in the past and could look in the future. Also, should we have then a subordinate manager for the compliance team as well? These are, I think, good ideas that need to be further explored. People want us to have the ability and time and capacity to do these things. It takes staffing, it takes resources. And then you also get into the question of funding. So it's not just idea, make it happen. There's a lot that has to go into analyzing, can we have stable and consistent funding to do these things, outside of projects when kind of project, applications kind of ebb and flow. Meaningful engagement on focused issues. So, part of this is getting into the rulemaking, looking at what are our application requirements, also looking at overlap between when we do have federal projects or projects that are both federal and state. How can we look at those, things that we can also rely on that the federal review is doing? So, we have a mandate, they have mandate, but these are also opportunities for us to improve upon. Phoebe talked about the Oregon energy strategy. So, that's what's being included in her process improvement program, for next year. And then same thing with the strategic plan, pulling those elements out that the agency is interested in, that the state is interested in. How can we then make those actionable within our sort of, projects that BB's trying to do on an annual basis. So those are kind of the, that go a lot further into the details of those as well, but those are just the general categories.
Counselor Byer.
Just an observation. So much of what we rely on when we look at application materials needs input from other state and federal agencies. And that, I think, also drives those review numbers. And I think when people look at these numbers, they say, oh, it's the Department of Energy. Well, it's the Department of Energy and consultation, not formal consultation, but relying on the expertise of these other agencies, which was one of the reasons the Siting Council was created, was to do kind of a one-stop shop. But with that builds in the timeframes of all the other agencies. And so it's always interesting to look at streamlining and think about, but how do we, put a bee in the bonnet of our sister agencies? And we don't really.
I appreciate you bringing that up because from its inception, that has been something that's been a difficulty. This is not a new issue. It's something, in my time, we've tried numerous different things. Sarah has come up with numerous different ideas, how to better engage, state agencies, local governments, tribal governments, have them review the materials that we need them to review and get us timely responses. That goes back to the 70s. So I've seen documentation where, that the idea is it's consolidated review. It eliminates the need to go out and get all of these individual reviews with individual comment timeframes and appeal paths and different decisions. So there's a lot of value in streamlining, but the difficulty is then it's not priority for them. And, it's not that they're not, they have their own things that they're doing. They have their own limitations, their own staffing. It's a legitimate and realistic difficulty that they struggle with. Some can rely, like ODFW can have a position that's partly sort of reliant on our funding because we have so many projects that we ask them to review. Others don't. And so there could be some infrequency of going to talk to this agency and having a different person review these things and having to explain to them who we are, why we have authority over something that they would normally have authority, why we're seeking their input, why that's a priority for them. That's a constant effort by us, and not just like every once in a while, it's literally every project, that effort has to take, is significant, and it's something, again, we've looked at many, many times in many different ways, and lately, Sarah's been trying to double down on that with the siting analysts to make sure that they have enough capacity, which again is going back to that idea of using AI. If we can save 40 hours on reviewing a flood of comments, not reviewing them, but sorting them, and we can save some of that time and then put it towards doing the outreach to, our agency partners and seeking their input. So, but yes, you're correct.
Okay. Counselor Devlin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wish I'd been here last month, but as you know, I had a wedding to attend, not mine. Would have liked to have been part of the discussion. I think I know why the legislature's asked for this, and I know why they're concerned. And when I was in the legislature, I always fought against this somehow belief that the world ended at the Columbia River and the Idaho border in California and the Oregon coast. But nationally, we're still seeing, despite the opposition of the federal administration, an expansion in clean energy. It's largely because decisions are being made in boardrooms that are logical and look at the actual needs of the grid and the needs of their customers. But I don't think we can entirely dismiss what has changed at the federal level. I mean, you have an administration that it's not pro clean energy. It's not neutral on energy. It's actually opposed to clean energy. Not only people often think about all the incentives that have gone away. They don't think about all the other things. The fact that much of the research that was being done is not being done. The fact that some of the things that entities depend upon are no longer available from the federal government. The fact that the EPA has been directed to not use certain words in their documents like clean energy or greenhouse gases, or the fact that they've even proposed at one time, many of these things obviously end up in court, of no longer having people that are putting a significant amount of carbon having to report anymore how much carbon they are, putting in the environment. I mean, we can't dismiss that, but I think the only positive in that is that clean energy is still expanding. Going to one issue though on transmission, I mean, we have kind of an antiquated system for transmission. We have, I guess, my understanding, two primary providers, BPA and PacifiCorp. But BPA, if you ever have time for something that's really frustrating, go to a BPA rate hearing. I've been to a few, and particularly I've been to the ones on transmission rates and the ones on actual rates for power, kind of similar, but the one on transmission rates are kind of interesting because there's hardly any entity there that's going to support an increase in transmission rates. If it doesn't benefit them directly, they're not supporting it. And so BPA, even when it tries to improve its system, faces opposition. And that's just modernization of the system, although they've done quite a bit. But I mean, and then when you talk about the legislature talks about public funding, from where? I mean, we've already seen that on many levels of government, we're already over our skis in terms of our level of expenditures versus revenue. So I think that's something that, takes some sort of very significant change. I mean, in the sense of how do you change transmission? I think we're far away from being able to say, this is where we think the future of renewable energy is, and this is the transmission lines we should have, and this is how we'll pay for it. Particularly if all the beneficiaries don't want to pay for anything that doesn't benefit them. It kind of reminds me of like when people that are like city councilors or county commissioners, when people come in and a roadway needs improvement, but they want only the new residents to pay for the improvement, not them, because they didn't cause the increase in usage. So, I mean, the legislature can think that this is easy, but it is not easy at all.
No. No, and we've seen like transmission is, I try to explain to people, transmission is complicated because it's complicated. It's not like it's complicated because the statutes or rules or review processes, like it is legitimately, you heard some of the comments today, on transmission is hard, like long distance transmission, siting, planning, permitting, construction. It's really, really hard, and nothing's going to change that. You can improve upon it, you can make it more efficient, but you're not going to eliminate the issues, the concerns, the impacts. That just, there's nothing you can do to change that.
Just following up on Councillor Devlin's comment, I'm glad you brought up the federal issue, because one of the things that I think also affects us is so many of our projects are international entities with, local LLC or more local LLCs. And they're competing in a world, those incentives make a difference. When there are no incentives here, but there are in, XYZ country, whatever, it's pretty easy to make a decision to invest here and we'll just wait out here. So I think where we may be experiencing that, at least for a period of time, that it becomes a global market we're really in, which affects what we're, that do it faster, do it faster, do it faster will help us with some, incentives or whatever. Yeah.
I think that's a great segue into Joni's report.
Yes.
But just as a kind of a leave you with this is, in spite of all these things, in spite of the tax credit, the July 5th date to begin construction, for the tax credits to go away, we're still seeing new projects. We, may have gotten a new notice of intent today. We're likely to get, or we just got that Speedway application. The developers, we'll see really in the next 6 months what the shakeout is of that kind of conclusion of that tax incentive. But, the short term is people are still coming to us. They're still proposing projects. That hasn't changed. Maybe their lead time, again, this is why it's a good segue into Joni's report, that we won't know about for a while, but it doesn't mean that like everything is dried up. We're still seeing projects and we're seeing new projects. So I will turn it over because that took a lot longer than I thought it was going to take.
It's good. Thank
Uh,
you.
Thank you for having me back again. For the record, Joni Sliger, Senior Policy Analyst with the Oregon Department of Energy, and I'm here to talk about the report on reducing barriers to clean energy deployment. As Secretary Cornett mentioned, this is required under Executive Order 2529. It was a recommendation in the Oregon Energy Strategy that this study be undertaken about at that time as well as now. It was known through the updates that there was about 3 gigawatts of projects that were approved but not yet under construction. The Energy Strategy acknowledged, interconnection delays are an example of something that is known to be a significant barrier for projects moving forward. But it was the report aims to do a deep dive into kind of projects have gotten approved. Why don't they get built as approved? So that is the high level. Next slide, please. Consistent with the EO, sorry, did I go one too many? This report includes both, my bad, sorry. An inventory of different barriers that can come up for projects, as well as some recommendations of what hopefully the state can do to help the projects overcome those, given the significant need we have for new projects. Thank you. So we shared the draft report went out for public comment. I spoke about this a bit last month, but happy to go into more detail. This was the initial inventory of those barriers that was shared out. There's 7 items here, not listed. These are not mutually exclusive necessarily, and they're not listed here in order of magnitude, but it is a compilation of what we were finding in our research on this topic, as well as an initial round of comments we had back in February and March that kind of asked a series of questions on what barriers people are seeing, whether that was in participation in projects or from developers themselves. That was a joint comment period for both reports, but these were the 7 that we highlighted. Next slide, please.
Actually, I'm sorry,
here.
before you move on from this slide. So on the permitting column,
Yeah.
I'm glad there wasn't, a barrier. FSEC takes too much time, So does the permitting column, would the permitting column capture a comment like that? Well, FSEC's process takes too much time, or was that just that wasn't an element of the seen as a barrier? It was permitting in general.
Thank you for that. I should clarify, these 3 columns, permitting, construction, and interconnection, are the terms used in the executive order of inventory of barriers to that. The scope of this report is specifically limited to things outside of the FSEC process. So to the extent, for example, interconnection, permitting was explicitly defined as being things outside of FSEC's process. So there's some discussion of federal permitting processes, things that are outside. Similarly, it didn't look at county processes either. This is kind of these reports are all intended to work together. Didn't want to be duplicative of the work Secretary Cornett did in his report, finding opportunities. Didn't want to be duplicative of the report DLCD did that was aiming to review processes and identify barriers and opportunities under Oregon's land use framework at the county level. So we did receive, I say, comments on both sides of these issues throughout the process so far of highlighting the importance of the protections that we have and the need for those to continue. Also recognizing these are every barrier that exists to this. Overcoming those is the goal of the executive order and of the report.
Thank you. Councillor Howe.
Just a quick one. I don't know if you know, is DLCD compiling the time it takes for counties to process the applications that used to come here?
I'm not sure offhand. I think we would.
Yeah, I haven't provided, but we can provide the link to their report to council. In fact, maybe I'll try to do that right now as Joni continues on hers. I've not had a chance to review their report. So I don't know if that's included in there or not, but I will send out that report, or at least the link to the report to you all right now.
It'd be interesting to know.
Councillor Beyer.
As a former county person, the processing at the county level often doesn't take that long because of just different code language at different counties. It's a conditional use process where things get hung up is in potential LUBA appeals, Land Use Board of Appeals, where back and forth. So unlike an FSEC decision, Supreme Court, the 475 days or however many for a contested case isn't anything compared to a LUBA deal. I may be wrong.
Councillor Calderon.
Assuming I'm a really creative business person trying to install one of these renewable energy facilities, and I want to do both the FSEC way and county way, is that a possibility, or is there any statute against that or for that?
Do you want to see?
I mean, if there's a project that is FSEC jurisdictional, they have to go into FSEC. If it's a local government and they want to opt into FSEC, they can opt into FSEC. I don't know if they can sort of be like, I'm going to decide. I mean, because right now was House Bill 4031 allowed through 2030, applicants who are FSEC jurisdictional to go to the county. So they can do that for some time now. So there's an option to avoid FSEC. We're still seeing projects. They're still coming to us. I don't know if they can legally do that or not. There was sort of this weird time where they were starting. It was after that bill was approved, but hadn't gone into effect. That bill's in effect now. I'm not sure you can kind of run parallel. I'm not sure why you would, but I don't know the answer to that question. It's probably, it is probably more of a legal question, but I don't have an answer to.
Yeah, because if I was worth my weight in executive level decisions for these types of projects, I mean, recognize that this giving authority over to the counties is pretty risky at this, if you really think about it. I'm not opposed to it, go for it, right? But I would want to do both for the benefit of completion or opposition rather than just saving time, because it sounds like they're not going to save money. That's just comment.
Thank you. I think we're good. We can go on.
So as I mentioned, the other part of this report is recommending ways for the state to help projects overcome these barriers. And the draft report is split between both highlighting some of the other actions from the Oregon Energy Strategy. Some of the discussion of barriers was things that came up in the development of that report as well. And so some of those actions are highly relevant here. One of them I highlight on this slide is for aiming for the advocacy at the federal level of policies that help advance Oregon's clean energy goals and development. These barriers generally are not unique to Oregon, and I don't expect it's reasonable for them to be solved by Oregon acting alone. In addition to that, the report has 4 additional recommendations that are split on the next 2 slides. So, the first of these, and these were roughly ordered in kind of the draft report in the sense of when they could potentially be implemented. It's a very rough ordering. They don't include, they aimed for the report not to have an explicit ask for direct state funds. Yes, having more money to throw at projects would be a wonderful way to overcome barriers. State is in a challenging process, so that is not one of the recommendations here. But that's kind of how they were structured. So the first recommendation here is something that in theory could be done now, which is to encourage set up kind of a voluntary reporting framework for these developers as they're in the interconnection process to be reporting if they are planning to withdraw from the process. A lot of the delays that can occur in the process come about when a project withdraws. Not to say this would be something necessarily everyone wants to do. We discussed some of those factors last month. But the interconnection process generally is very anonymized to protect market competition, essentially. And so this isn't information that is necessarily shared right now, but it is something that could be potentially helpful to support kind of private actors in seeing if there's a conversation they want to have about that withdrawal being less attractive as the thing that happens versus some sort of funding agreement or other arrangement that multiple people in the interconnection process could come to. These questions on?
Yes, thank you. Chair Condon. Is that something that has been requested by developers, or is that something generated from staff that it would be nice if we could do this?
It was an idea from staff. So
Okay.
coming from, we know at the time of the interconnection, at the energy strategy, interconnection delays are a known significant barrier, but there's also a lot of reforms going on to address those. And those conversations have been going on for some years, and those processes are still in the works, and kind of it's possibly too early to tell whether they will be as effective as hoped, but things take time. And there's a very, I think, clear desire to not mess with that ahead of time. So this was a potential idea that could hopefully minimize that sort of effect of a more ambitious recommendation on interconnection. Also recognizing that the vast majority of interconnection, this report focuses on projects over 20 megawatts in size. Those are not subject to state control. the interconnection process for these generally either happen at Bonneville Power Administration, which receives a lot of, because it has so much transmission, or they are processed by PacifiCorp and others, subject to requirements set by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. It's only small projects generally that really have requirements that are set by the Oregon Public Utility Commission. That said, though, there was not an outpouring of that. We have, I don't know how relevant this is. It's kind of a like very minor example, but I would observe there were some paid advertisements, I guess I would say, of a developer expressing interest in acquiring interconnection rights from others. So would people be interested in this if it was offered? Maybe. I wouldn't say there was an outpouring of, yes, this would make a difference. We're still processing all of the comments we got on the report. The comment period has now closed. But it is a new concept, and there is a bit of a, maybe this would help. What could go wrong here?
Yeah. Thank you.
The second item is very in line with Odo's mission to provide a space for challenging conversations on Oregon's energy. So it is a recommendation to kind of continue this conversation and dialogue about things across these reports and initiatives by holding an annual or semi-annual forum to discuss and evaluate opportunities for improvement and dialogue across different processes, really intended to focus on those cross-jurisdictional coordination limitations, and that was one of the barriers on the prior slide. But aiming to continue that forward. In the report, you may have noticed Odo recommended that first forum be a focus on interconnection processes and the significant changes that have occurred, to discuss kind of what are the implications of that for other processes. What should people working in these other spaces know? For example, site control requirements have been added or maybe increased, I should say, in interconnection processes, and timing and when things are due in interconnection processes have changed. So I think that's information that could be helpful for county planners, for example, to be aware of, as it may affect both their workload and pressure for certain times.
Councillor Calderon.
Thank you. Yeah, before we move on, I just thought of something. There's going to be funding associated with this executive order, and I know your first bullet point, it says encourage interconnection applicants to voluntarily report plans. And while that is a great intention, my experience has been that people don't usually volunteer things, and especially of this magnitude, such information. But I'm wondering if recommendation for the ODOE, if you could provide some type of incentive that would allow these companies to tell you privately why they withdrew their application. Maybe it's something you have or haven't thought about, but I know that when people have an incentive to do things, they do things, especially corporations. So that's my commentary there. But
Thank you.
Appreciate that. I will note, just to be clear on that recommendation, it's to voluntarily report for other market actors to have a conversation, but hearing your comment and echoing what we heard earlier on the having better information from developers on why they withdraw from the EPSEC process is information that we don't currently collect and could be very informative.
yeah, well, energy is big business. So again, incentives work very well for these types of situations.
Yes, they do. Thank you. Next slide. So the third recommendation here, you've probably heard there are new day-ahead markets being discussed. PacifiCorp launched the first one, CAISO's extended day-ahead market on May 1st this year. And this is a recommendation that we look at this new data that will be coming out of this market and see what conclusions we can draw from it as so far as ways that the state might be able to use that to sort of prioritize or help fund different interconnection costs. I didn't go into detail on this, but the limited grid capacity that we have can manifest for individual generating projects as very expensive costs for interconnection because it is the interconnection process can identify a need for them to pay for upgrades that can be for upgrades to the transmission system. And so the hope for this would be that there will be a wealth of new data. It's new. We've never had it before. What can we do with it? Is it something that could be helpful to help inform this as we see those new markets take effect? And then finally, sorry.
How do you see that data? Yeah.
It's a good question. There are some reports issued by the CAISO for its day-ahead market so far. Those are published. I think it could be a bit of a question moving forward of this. This is something the report explicitly says we don't want to do that today. The market only launched in May, and you want to have a critical mass of this data. So I think it wouldn't be necessarily the only data set that would be relevant to this conversation. It could be some conversation. This report was done in coordination with both the Public Utility Commission and Department of Land Conservation and Development. And I think it would be a conversation with PUC, for example, is also of where are they seeing this data come in their planning processes. But it may be an analysis that concludes, this is all very interesting, but the data we actually need is this. And the result could be this new data should be reported, getting to a deeper dive. But there are daily and monthly reports that have been published by the CAISO so far. Historically, the day-ahead market is new, but the energy imbalance market started in, I believe, 2014. And there has been a fair amount of reporting and discussion of the benefits that have accrued to customers from that market reporting. From that market operating.
Thank you.
It also could potentially manifest in the interconnection process itself, but the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab has commented that assessing interconnection costs at a national scale is something they have endeavored to do. They have some research on, but it can be very difficult to collect.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the fourth recommendation here, I mentioned this report focuses on projects over 20 megawatts in size, but we know that smaller resources are a very important part of Oregon's portfolio to meet its goals. So the final recommendation is to conduct a similar investigation into some of those smaller scale facilities all the way down to rooftop solar and behind the meter. The report mentions some of this could be also looking at some of the more innovative developments. You may have heard of some floating solar installations that have come in Oregon, as well as discussions about the possibility of solar installations in the pivot corners on farmland. Something to further look into that could help get the generation we need, and in particular, potentially on a faster timeline than may be realistic for some of the larger projects. We also received some comments earlier on about barriers that some facilities are facing that are existing and operational right now, but barriers that they are facing to their continued operation, particularly small-scale hydroelectric and biomass facilities. And that is something that was out of scope of this report, but is similarly something that we think further investigation on would be very worthwhile. I think that's the end of the slides. Okay. So thank you again so much for having me.
Thank you. Todd, do you have anything further?
No, just to tee up kind of where we're at right now. So, particularly in the siting report, I built in just a placeholder if council wants to make a statement in there, whatever that may be. You're not required to. If you're interested, you can do that. You can provide sort of comments. Hey, we want to see more information here, less information there. Chair Condon found some typos. Those are helpful too. So, we want to make sure ultimately when we issue the report that, it's reflective, of, what we've heard from, others, including the council. So if you are interested in making a statement, that's part of the reason why we wanted to come back today, for either report. You can do that. The only thing is we have to issue them September 1st, by September 1st. So, I think the council meeting in August is that, sorry, give me a second. The 20th and 21st. So it wouldn't be impossible, but in terms of the production cycle and having, the amount of review that needs to incur in the agency before we issue a report formally, particularly on, response to executive order, that would make it a little bit tight if we're waiting for the August meeting. So, not to put council on the spot today, but, that's where if you want to, include some sort of formal statement, you don't have to do it by vote, but I included some motion language for each of the reports if you wanted to do that, but not any actual proposed, language for you to, in terms of a comment. So it's pretty open as to
Okay.
what you're interested in doing right now. You can do nothing. You
Okay.
can add, make changes, comments, a specific statement. It's really whatever your desire is.
If I can just make a comment, I think the work done, obviously in depth, great material for us, very informative for an FSAC member to read the draft report on siting, and really, it's a good reminder of what we're supposed to, what we do. Because the report, both reports are comprehensive at a Department of Energy level, I didn't feel great that a statement from the council on the report, we know the council business, but the report is more inclusive. And so I'm not sure what that statement would be. The only comment that I have right now, other than typos, because I read word for word, but is where the Energy Facility Siting Council is involved, like in the process, like compliance, where, I think the Energy Facility Siting Council certainly either was very involved or initiated, we need more compliance, whatever, that statements like the Department of Energy works closely with the council to on our compliance, on improving compliance, whatever that would be. And the reason for that is this council works differently than a lot of other councils, boards, or commissions. And we're quasi-judicial. We have a job to do that is to look at projects and permit them or not, or site certificate or not, as opposed to the work of the staff in general. So that was just my read. Councillor Byer.
So if we did any kind of statement, I loved Les's comments that, yes, we support the siting of energy facilities, but we have these other requirements to protect the public assets of Oregon, or some fancy language like that. I think Commissioner Devlin also made some good points about we aren't doing this in a vacuum. Siting does not occur in a vacuum. We have market forces, we have federal policy that does, not to belittle our role, but has a lot more impact on these decisions than our siting decisions do. There are just these bigger forces. And then I think the point about we have a picture of the resources that are being implemented here to generate renewable energy, but it's not a complete picture. We don't know all the drivers behind those corporate decisions. And I think those would be general level comments that as a siting council, we could make. We don't have to, these stand alone on their own. But if we wanted to, I'd like to cast it in that, what's the role of the council? But also to kind of echo what we heard in the progress improvement reports is, we're working on this. We're working on our rulemaking. We're doing internal process improvements at the department level to support these siting decisions. So I think there could be a couple bullet points if we wanted to make them, that wouldn't blur the lines between the council and the department too much, if that makes sense.
I think it makes sense. I'm just not sure what, yeah, how we would write it. And I found the report pretty inclusive of, that the public there's a high priority for public involvement. I thought the report kind of covered that from a council perspective pretty well. So maybe if we all sit with it again for another month. It was great that Councillor Devlin was here, and because you weren't here last month to get your thoughts on it, and certainly Councillor Walton, who is new. And if there are comments individually, maybe get them to Todd, and you can kind of put them in your magic, potion deal, and maybe suggest
That's the
language,
magic
or,
potion.
what is a comment, what if you've heard something that would make a comment. I think we're supportive of the report.
So here's a proposal. You don't have to
Okay.
take it, but just kind of based on this conversation, there is a good week before, when the council meeting occurs next and, the report has to be issued. If individual council members provide their thoughts to me, because again, what I want to be careful is that we don't, fall into the, inadvertent council meeting, by having just a series of emails back and forth where everybody's sort of, thinking about it. We don't want to do that. But if you could if you don't have to, but if anybody has individual thoughts or ideas, and if you like the idea of more of a bullet point sort of commenting versus a narrative, then you can feed that to me. I can then try to compile that, and that way it's in the report. The agency can then, as we're kind of going through our internal comms, I can have this as a draft. It's a placeholder. This is really the content, but then I can still get your validation at the next council meeting. And then the turnaround is much quicker.
I think that sounds good. Would that be acceptable to everyone? Okay. Councillor Howe?
Fire just said in summary, high level. That I thought was good.
Hopefully she'll submit it to Todd.
We've got the recording of the council
we
meeting
go.
as well.
There
So part of it is we can take what, we've gotten from the recording, but I think also it would be helpful for, everybody to go back and maybe sit with it a little bit, like you said, and then you can feed me comments. And again, I just to kind of respond to your point, like, I think Joni's report is a little more convoluted from sort of council's
Mhm.
authority. She's certainly open to hearing, what comments you have and providing something. But I think, while the executive order is to the Department of Energy, and that's true, and there is absolute need for the department, to be sort of evaluating, the siting report. It's fundamentally your authority. So this is again where this sort of awkward split, that I don't know exists in other boards and commissions and agencies, the way it's split with FSEC and ODO, but this really is your authority. So I feel like you do have the ability if you want to. It's not like we're not sure if it's our role, it's your role. It is absolutely your role. It's also the department's role, but it's your role. So I think if you have some thoughts and ideas and strong feelings, it should be articulated in this report as well.
Well, and on that fact, I mean, I think you captured, at least through my time on council, that you've captured pretty readily in that report subjects that we've taken on that, maybe hadn't been taken on earlier. Councillor Howe might have some thoughts about that. And so you brought them into the report, that, I thought, oh, yeah, that's covered. Public engagement is covered. Compliance is covered. So yeah, and Joanna, your report, it was very informative, but I found less of a role for us, really. It was very informative to what we do, kind of behind the curtain stuff. So yeah. Councillor Calderon.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to leave us with this thought now that we're wrapping up, and it's just a different perspective. So an executive order is a directive, correct? And it will be followed regardless until the next governor repeals it or keeps it, correct? And it impacts. I mean, we're a council, but it will impact constituents as well. So the way I see it is we're going to support this executive order as a council in every way that we can. And I just want to highlight cross-cutting action 10, which I just looked up online. This is my favorite part of the executive order, and I'll emphasize the part that I like. It's energy to foster decarbonization and economic growth through consideration of industrial symbiosis, clean energy innovation, emerging technologies, and incentives. I think we recognize that what we currently have, and there's statutes for the renewable energy that we currently have, right? And we fully support them as long as they follow the statute. But there is an opportunity there to evolve what is available. And that's my commentary, let's say, as part of this council for the executive order.
Yeah, I mean, to respond, yes, we're an executive branch agency. The executive order has clear direction to us. That's, doing these evaluations, putting these reports together, seeking input, from the public, seeking input from council. You're kind of an agency, of a board and commission, kind of a combination of the two, but effectively you're also governed by the executive order as, as a governor appointed, Senate confirmed, board. So, the short answer is yes to all of those. So whatever is in the executive order, we're obligated to, try to move forward on. But like a lot of things, that's the point of the executive order. What are the opportunities? There's a lot of context to some of this stuff. And that's why the reports need to do what they need to do. Is it's not just do these things blindly without any additional thought. It's what's the broader understanding and context. And then with all of that in mind, what are the opportunities?
Councillor Beyer?
Joni, thank you for spending time with us. Even though we may not offer direct comments, we're still very interested in your report and in follow-up. As these forums occur, if you would come back and tell us if there's been any movement on interconnection, because it may inform some of our decision-making or rulemaking, because it seems like it's a big thing that's over here from us, but connected. So thank you again for your time and your thorough reporting.
Thank you very much.
And just one last kind of piece, unless you tell me differently, I will just have the executive order follow up on the consent calendar and not a specific agenda item. So that way,
Perfect.
again, whether we pull information from the reporting, you feed it to me, we'll provide that in advance of the council meeting. So you'll have that opportunity to look at that information. And then whether you feel like you need a vote, the consent calendar, you can vote during the consent calendar. So whether you want to vote or just, kind of acknowledge you're in agreement with that, we can do it whatever way you want.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other comments from council, questions for the good of the order, comments? With that, we're adjourned. The time is now 2:18. We're a little bit late, but we've been on time for several meetings. So we are now adjourned and we'll see you in August.
Thank you.
So, thank you.